Thank you first of all for being here with us tonight. Are you hearing me well? I think it's better now. So it's truly a pleasure to welcome you to Haigazian University for what I believe will be a very special and eye-opening event today. It's wonderful to see such a diverse group today of attendees, students, colleagues, professionals from different fields. And guests from outside the university all gather to explore a topic that continues to raise important questions across the globe, which is the Bitcoin. But tonight's discussion goes far beyond just a currency, a protocol, or a market trend. It's about whether technology, specifically decentralized technology, can play a role in addressing deeply human and complex issues such as governance, that freedom, trust, freedom, and inequality. So help us explore to this topic. We are honored to welcome Dr. Saifedean Ammous, a voice that has helped shape this conversation worldwide. Dr. Ammous is best known for his book, The Bitcoin Standard, a book that has been read, translated, and debated in more than 30 languages. His ideas have reached audiences from universities to central banks, from software engineers to national policymakers. Through his work, he has introduced many to the idea that Bitcoin is not just a tool, but a statement about how systems can work without central control, and about the cost and consequences of monetary manipulation. Of course, I will not go to full biography of Dr. Ammous. That privilege belongs to Mr. Gorin, who will introduce him properly in just a few minutes. Instead, I would like to talk why this topic matters so much, especially for us at Haigazian University, and particularly to those us in computer science department. When people think of computer science, what things come to their mind? Coding, systems, servers, networks, algorithms, and yes, we all do all of that. But our role as educators and mentors goes far beyond teaching how to use these tools or write clean codes. We are preparing students to enter a world where technology is deeply woven into every part of life: education, healthcare, media, security, business, and yes, money. And that world is changing rapidly. One of the most powerful things about Bitcoin is that it makes people question daily life questions like, can a system function without central authority? Can trust be built with code instead of institution? And these aren't just academic questions. They are questions that impact daily life, especially in places where inflation, corruption, political instability, all this happens, and we experience it on a daily basis. That's why it is important that we explore this topic and openly and seriously, without hype, but also without fear. Whether you agree with Bitcoin promises or not, it has already changed the world. And it is essential that we understand what that means. In a computer science department at Haigazian University, we always emphasize interdisciplinary thinking. Technology by itself is not enough. We must understand how it's used, why it's built, and who benefits from it. We must ask the ethical questions, the political questions, the social, historical questions, because these are the questions that shape responsible innovation. That is why this lecture is part of our larger vision. We want our students and our wider community to not only use and be users of technology, but be leaders, thinkers, and change makers. We want them to understand how the system works, how they can be improved, and how technology can help build more transparent, inclusive, and sustainable societies. And we believe in bringing the word into the university through lectures, partnerships, field visits, dialogues like this one, because learning should never be limited to the classroom or the lab. It should be a lifelong process of discovery, reflection, and engagement. So to our students, to encourage you,
listen well, closely to Dr. Ammous, and ask big questions. And follow your curiosity. Don't just memorize facts. Think about ideas. Think about impact. To our friends and faculty members and guests, thank you for supporting events like this. It is your participation and encouragement that give students the confidence to grow and the space to think. I would first like to extend my sincere thanks to President Haigazian for his support and for facilitating tonight's event, which reflects our university's ongoing commitment to open dialogue and intellectual exploration, especially as we celebrate this year Haigazian University's 70th anniversary. I want to thank everyone involved in organizing committee tonight, students especially, to our speaker who accepted our invitation, and also Mr. Gorun Jinyan, who made this initiative and made all the efforts to make this deal. I thank also all the efforts and the spirit of collaboration that we are able to host meaningful and impactful events like this. And now it is my honor to hand the floor to Mr. Gorun Jinyan, who is graduate of this year, 2025, computer science graduate, who will introduce the notion of Bitcoin and then present our guest speaker, Dr. Saifedean Ammous. Thank you and enjoy the lecture. Floor is yours, Gorun.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Shant. I'm glad all of you have joined us here today. Now, when we hear about Bitcoin on social media or on news headlines, it's more often than not about its price volatility, prices going up, prices going down. And I mean, I understand this obviously captures our attention. And yes, that price movement sometimes it's intense, at least for now. But focusing only on the price action misses the deeper revolution happening, which is a better and new monetary system. Bitcoin is not just another investment opportunity. It is the first and only successful attempt to create a truly decentralized fixed supply money, something many thought it was initially impossible. It operates without requiring trust in any central authority, government, or institution. Unlike fiat currencies, the dollar, the euro, the Lebanese pound, which can be printed at will by a simple mouse click by central banks, Bitcoin's supply is hard-capped mathematically and programmatically, which makes it the hardest money humanity has ever known. It's essentially a return to the first principles of what money should be, a medium of exchange that is decentralized, which cannot be stopped, a store of value that cannot be debased, and a unit of account that is borderless and out of any political systems. That's why I like to call it a 21st century solution to a first century problem. What began as a white paper, or a blueprint if you want to call it, has turned into a nearly $2.5 trillion asset class that has fundamentally challenged our understanding about money, savings, and financial sovereignty. The alternative that central banks that Bitcoin provides should honestly concern every single one of us. All the horrible acts that we witness in the world, such as endless wars, mass murder of innocent civilians, and the pointless sanctions, are all made possible by the simple fact that the means to fund these actions are just printed at will by a simple mouse click. And we are left bearing the heavy consequences of heavy inflation, shrinkflation, loss of savings, and the overall degradation of quality of life. And that's why, as Bitcoiners, we say, fix the money, you fix the world. If you don't look at it in a serious manner, you'll just assume that the current system just works, right? Well, that's simply not true. While people are still endlessly waiting for when Bitcoin will fail, I'm just honestly waiting for when will banks and central banks succeed. For a short fun fact, back in 2022, when I wrote my research paper about Bitcoin and how hard money adoption fixes this endless inflationary cycle of fiat currencies, the price of one Bitcoin was around $30,000. 2 years later, in 2024, when I hosted my own event right here in this room titled Why Bitcoin Matters Beyond the Hype, the price of one Bitcoin was around $60,000. And now today, as we have Dr. Ammous with us, it's around $120,000. You know the joke? Double it and give it to the next person. As a computer scientist, Bitcoin has a special place in my heart. Through open source code and true ingenuity, it solves one of the oldest problems in human history. And what fascinates me is how hundreds of developers worldwide collaborated on Bitcoin's initial idea and willingly joined the network to help it establish the initial base that needed it to survive its hardest phase. It's a perfect example of how computer science can change the world when brilliant minds work together. And on open source projects, the late Hal Finney, one of the earliest collaborators of Bitcoin, once said, if you want to change the world, don't protest, just code. This brings me back to the Bitcoin Standard book, a book I first read in late 2021, which I consider it one of the best Bitcoin economics book I have ever came across. When I read the book, I had two goals in mind. Goal number one was to understand why our lives are becoming harder to sustain financially when logically they should become much easier through innovations across many industries and the overall efficiency that technology brings to the table. And the reason number two was to understand how Bitcoin fits in this messy puzzle. I can honestly say that the book did not disappoint. I believe personally, if there's a subject you're passionate about and you really care about, there's always someone whose work has satisfied your curiosity and gave you a deeper understanding of the subject. And I can proudly say that that voice is here with us today. Without further delay, please welcome me in welcoming Dr. Ammous to share his knowledge and explain to us how Bitcoin is a technological solution for money and politics. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you to everybody for joining here. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here. I'm a neighbor of Haigazian. I've lived for about 15 years of my life in this neighborhood, very close to Haigazian, but this is the first time I actually enter the campus. So I'm very glad that you finally let me in to this inner sanctum of learning. I'm going to be discussing some of the main ideas in my book, The Bitcoin Standard, and the economics of Bitcoin, why I think Bitcoin is important, and what the role of Bitcoin is going to be. And to begin with, I think the key thing, or the first thing with which we begin, is this fine? Is the microphone fine, or should I step back? It's fine? Okay. The key idea that I like to begin with is to just first of all, let's begin with a definition of what Bitcoin is. Should I explain? Okay. Yeah, sure. Okay, now is better? All good? Hello? 1, 2, 3. Yes? Okay, tamam. So the definition that I give for Bitcoin in my book, which I think is a useful starting point, is that Bitcoin is a software code for running a computer network that is peer-to-peer and that allows for the operation of a payment network between all the peers on the network. And what distinguishes this software and this payment network from everything else, or all other software and other payment networks, is that this payment network has two unique properties. Number one, it does not rely on anybody for it to operate. So everybody who uses it can just use it as a neutral technology, in the same way that you don't have to rely on anybody to make a wheel or to make a pencil. You just know how to make a pencil, you know how to make a wheel, and then you can use it. Everybody uses Bitcoin in that same way. There's no authority that you have to rely on. There's no central party that is responsible for it, which I think is a really important thing. In other words, if you want to join the network for Google, for Facebook, for Apple, for MTC, Alpha, any network in the world, generally, there's always an admin, right? You call Google, you sign up on the website, you give them your name, you get your address, and they give you your account. And there's an admin, and he decides, or they decide, what you get on the network. You can send emails, but you can't do this, you can do that. And they can decide to shut you off from the network. They can kick you out of the network if they want to. They can increase your privileges on the network. But somebody is in charge, and you are a user. So there's an admin and a user. Bitcoin has no admins. It's a network with no admin. Everybody is their own admin on the network. Everybody decides for themselves what they want to do on the network. And nobody has privileges that exceed anybody else's privileges. We're all equal on the network. If you join the network, you're equal to everybody else. So that's the first unique thing about Bitcoin. And the second unique thing about it is that the payment network runs on a form of money that is the hardest money ever invented. It is the form of money whose supply cannot be increased beyond what it has already been established at from the beginning. So from the day one of the operation of the network, it was set that there was only going to ever be 21 million Bitcoins. And 16 years later, and there was a schedule for how much these Bitcoins are going to be produced, and 16 years later, we're still running on that schedule. And currently, there are about 19.5 million Bitcoins, almost 20 million Bitcoins that are out in circulation. And that's exactly going according to schedule. That we should have been at this point we should have had this amount of Bitcoin at this point, and it's exactly going according to schedule. So there will only ever be 21 million Bitcoin. So those two properties are really, really significant in my opinion. And because of that, they make Bitcoin, as far as I'm concerned, the most advanced technology that we have for money. So I think a very helpful way to begin to understand Bitcoin is to not think of it in terms of this new thing, not think of it as something like a smartphone, which is a new machine that does all kinds of wonderful things. It's not like a TV. If you're in an isolated island in 1960 and somebody comes and tells you we've invented this thing called a TV, it's weird. I mean, why do you need to see people jumping around on a TV? It sounds like a weird thing. But Bitcoin is not a new thing. It's the same old thing that humanity has used since we've been humans, basically, which is money. It's just a new iteration and a new technological implementation of the old technology that we know as money. But it does it better than all the other monies. And I think this is why it's really, really important. And why, as Gurun said, it's not something that is just a curiosity. It's not something that's just for computer scientists. It's not something that for economists. It's something that affects everybody. Everybody in the world uses money, and everybody in the world would benefit from using the better money, and everybody in the world would be hurt from using inferior money. So thinking about those properties and this network in this regard, I think can help us understand what the importance of this technology is. So let's dig into these two properties first. So let's begin with the hardness. What do we mean when we say Bitcoin is the hardest money ever? As I said, only 21 million Bitcoin. Now, why is this such a big deal? Because historically, and in my book, The Bitcoin Standard, the first 7 chapters of the book don't even really mention Bitcoin once, or maybe once, just only once. But the 7 chapters of the book are about the history of money and the history of the technology of money and how it has evolved. And only in the last 3 chapters do I introduce Bitcoin. And effectively what I did, and initially when I wrote it, the last 3 chapters were the first 3 chapters, and the first 7 came after. And it seemed like I'll introduce Bitcoin and explain what Bitcoin is, and then I'll give the history of money to explain why this is a big deal. But then in the last few weeks before it went to publication, I decided, no, I'm going to switch them around. I'm going to spend 7 chapters talking about things that don't have anything to do with Bitcoin, and then that will make Bitcoin obvious, and that will help people understand Bitcoin. And I think it was a very successful move, because the best way toward understanding something is to understand the why behind it. So the how is important, how Bitcoin functions is important, but if you don't have the why, then the how is very difficult to grasp. Once you have the why, then every aspect about how it operates becomes easier to understand. So to explain the why of Bitcoin, why Bitcoin was invented, why Bitcoin operates the way it does, and why it is such a big deal, we go back to ancient history, ancient human history, look at what has been used as money throughout human history. And we find generally that the things that humans have used as money, they are very different things, all kinds of different things. People have used cattle, they've used limestones, rare seashells, glass beads, metals, precious metals, and recently even government money. Can you believe that? Some primitive tribes use this insane technology. And in prison, people use cigarettes sometimes. But if you look at all of those things, there's one thing that unites them. What is it that makes all of those things work as money? And when do they stop working as money? The most important thing that unites them when they work as money properly is that they are hard to make. This is it. Money is whatever is hardest to make. This is my contention in the book, and I think it is a pretty consistent observation throughout history. In societies where seashells were rare, in societies that lived on islands, they used the rarest seashells, the rarest kind of seashells, they were used as money. In a little island in which they didn't have limestones, they used limestone as money because it was very hard to find limestone in that island. If you wanted to get limestone, you had to get on a boat, go to a very far island, get the limestone and come back. The boat could flip over. It was expensive, it was difficult to get, and because of that, it worked as money. And that makes sense. Observation matches theory here. If we think about it, why would you want to use something that is easy to make as money? You wouldn't, right? You would want to use as money something that is difficult to make. And historically, indeed, we find that that is the case. And what we find is that the things that are hard to make are money, whether people understand that they are money because they are hard to make or not, whether people consciously make that decision or not, money ends up being what is hard to make because of the economics of supply, basically. So even if people don't understand what money is, if we live in a society in which we have 100 things that are easy to make and one thing that is difficult to make, and then we all randomly choose our money. I choose I'm going to use gold as money, he chooses copper, he chooses tree leaves, somebody else chooses toilet paper, somebody else chooses liras. All of these people, over time, they can take whatever choice they want, but over time, some things are easy to make. So the people who use the money that is easy to make will witness their wealth dissipate and disappear because the producers of that thing will keep producing more of it until the price of it crashes, and then the value of the money is destroyed. Whereas the thing that is hard to make is not going to be made in increasing quantities, and so the people who use it as money will witness their wealth appreciate over time, and therefore they will be the ones who manage to keep their wealth. So even if people randomly just chose their money, 100 years down the line, 200 years down the line, the only remaining money is going to be whatever is hard to make because everything else is destroyed in terms of its value because of it's easy to make. So this is what we find historically, that money is always the hardest to make liquid good. Of course, a lot of things are hard to make, but they're not liquid. You can't use them as money. There are other properties of money. It has to be fungible, it has to be liquid, it has to be easy, transportable, and so on. But of course, a lot of things fulfill those other functions, but the really critical one, the most critical function for money to fulfill is the difficulty of production. And so this helps us understand why, at the end of the 19th century, the whole world was using gold as money. Why was the world using gold as money? And Armenians, of course, you guys know gold very well. You've got great experience with gold. Great Armenian jewelers in Lebanon, everybody knows, of course. So a lot of people think that gold is money because it's yellow and shiny. Gold is money because it's great jewelry. But in fact, it's the other way around. Gold is jewelry because it is valuable, and it is valuable because it is money. And the reason that gold became money across the world, and the whole world was basically using gold as money in the year 1900, is because gold is the commodity that is the hardest to make. It's the one whose supply is the hardest to increase. Gold is very rare in the crust of the earth. It's the rarest metal, probably. It's very difficult to find gold. But more important than the fact that it is difficult to find, what makes gold so unique is that it is indestructible. Gold cannot be ruined, it cannot rust, it cannot be consumed. And so all of the gold that humanity has produced over thousands and thousands of years is still out there. The gold that Cleopatra wore 3,000-4,000 years ago could be worn by somebody in this room today. It could be in a coin that you own, it could be in a bar in some bank somewhere. The same exact gold over time, nothing can happen to it. It can't rust, it can't be destroyed. Even if there was a nuclear war and the nuclear bomb fell, the gold will melt, it'll become liquid, and then it'll settle down and it'll go back to being gold. So because of that, because it's indestructible, what that means is that over time, the supply of gold is constantly growing. And so even as we get better at finding more and more gold, even as our technology for digging for gold increases in its efficiency, we are still barely able to make a dent in the supply of gold. We're only able to increase the supply, the existing stockpiles of gold, by a very tiny fraction over time. And so because of that, if you look throughout history, if you look at the total supply of gold that humanity has, it goes up every year at around 1.5 to 2%. That's it. It can't increase at a higher rate than that. Why? Because even though every year we get slightly better and we find more gold, and we keep digging more, we find more, we get better machines, we find more gold. So every year we produce more gold than the previous year, roughly. Over time, the trend goes up. But because we're not consuming the gold, every year the extra quantity that we produce is still roughly the same ratio of the existing quantity, because the quantity that we have, the stockpiles, are also increasing and they're not being consumed. So because of that, we see that gold increases every year at around 1.5 to 2%. And nothing else is like that in all the other metals. So the silver was the thing that is closest, and at a certain point it increased in supply at around 5% to 10%, something like that per year. But gold increases at only 1.5 to 2% per year. And so therefore, over time, if people choose iron as money, they will witness the value of their iron decline, because over time, people can produce more and more iron, and iron miners can dump large quantities of iron compared to existing stockpiles on the market, because iron is constantly being consumed and it rusts and it ruins in many different ways. So if you're choosing to store your wealth in iron, that wealth is going to dissipate. If you're choosing to store your wealth in copper, that wealth is going to dissipate. If you're choosing to store it in silver, it's going to dissipate and it's going to lose value. But if you choose to store it in gold, it maintains its value. And so over centuries, this led to gold becoming money everywhere. And in my book, I describe all of these examples of primitive societies that were using things other than gold as money. And then somebody comes in with gold as money, and then that destroys the existing money. And it destroys the existing money in two ways. A, because the gold, people want to buy gold, and so the value of the gold goes up and they sell their inferior money. And also because the new society, people find new ways of introducing the old money. So for instance, in West Africa, they used to use glass beads as money, because in West Africa, they didn't have glass-making technology. But Europeans and Arabs would go to West Africa, and they saw that they would be using these glass beads, which they got from trade with Europeans and Arabs, because Europeans and Arabs had glass-making technology. So they were very rare in West Africa, so West Africans used them as money. But then Europeans and Arabs came and saw that, wow, these people's money is very easy for us to make. So Europeans would go back to Europe and they would fill an entire boat of glass beads and send it to West Africa, and then use that to buy things in West Africa. And so imagine what would that do? That would, of course, lead to the value of the glass beads declining. And it would allow the guy who had the boat of cheap glass beads, which he got for very little money in Europe, it would allow him to buy everything in West Africa, to the point where these things became known as the slave beads, because they bought slaves with them, because they made the West Africans effectively sell each other into slavery in order to acquire those beads. But the end result, of course, was that the value of the beads went to nothing, and the Europeans managed to get all of the goods of West Africa, including the humans. They took humans as slaves. So this dynamic, I believe, is a very powerful one, and it's an extremely important one, because it continues to operate whether people understand it or not, and it is continuously operating at all times and places everywhere. We see it. We see the same thing happening with government monies. And so in 1900, the whole world was on the gold standard effectively, but then in 1914, the world went off the gold standard with the start of World War I, and we moved toward government money. And this, I think, is probably, without exaggeration, the worst thing to have ever happened to the human race, if I may say so myself. This was basically the most destructive thing that happened to human civilization, because all of our human civilization is a world in which we are constantly improving the money, the technology that we use for money, and our technology for money is constantly improving in that it is becoming harder to make, which therefore allows people to save wealth into the future more. But then in 1914, governments effectively took over all of the gold that they hold, and they banned people from using other things as money. They banned people from using gold as money, and they forced people to use their own paper as money. And since then, the governments have been increasing the supply of money much more than the supply of gold. So if gold was increasing at only 1.5 or 2% per year, government money over the last 60 years, between 1960 and 2020, in these 60 years, we see that the government money supply has increased on average by about 14% per year. That's what your average government money does. So it's about 10 times as much inflation as gold on average. The best government monies, things like the US dollar, the euro, the Swiss franc, the Japanese yen, the British pound, these are generally the better national currencies. Their supply increases at only around 7-8% per year. And then the worst monies, their supply can increase at 50%, 100%, maybe even more per year. And so if you take the overall average over the last 60 years, it comes out to about 60% per year, which is, 14% per year over the last 60 years. So what does this do? Well, the first and most obvious effect of it is that people lose the ability to save. 14% increase in supply per year means roughly doubling of the quantity over 5 years. And that means you lose half of the value stored in your money over 5 years. And this has been the user experience with government money over the last century. Yani, if you put a certain sum of government money under your mattress and you wait 5 years, depends on where you are, you're going to lose some part of it. But the average user experience is 50% in 5 years, which is, of course, enormously significant. It's basically robbing you. Imagine losing half of your wealth over 5 years. Of course, there are many more extreme examples where you lose 50% in a week sometimes you lose 90% in a month. And Lebanon obviously had a similar example twice, obviously. But on average, it's been about 50% every 5 years. So what does this do? I think this is a huge problem, and it is reflected in many, 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 many facets of the world's problems that we see. And it is a huge problem in two regards. On the first hand, what is happening here is that you as an individual, you are losing the ability to save for your future. You're losing the ability to provide for your future self. If you have a certain sum of money, it's not difficult for you to provide it. It's not easy for you anymore to save that money into the future. So if you're an individual trying to plan for your future, trying to make your world, trying to think about where you want to be 10 years from now, you're a 20-year-old, you're a university student, you're starting work, and you're thinking about, in 10 years' time, I'd like to own a house, I'd like to be married, and I'd like to have a family. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you for this. So you're thinking about where you want to be in 10 years' time. And if your money loses half of its value every 5 years, then every dollar that you save today, you can expect to only have 25 cents in 10 years' time. How likely are you to save? If you spend $1 today, you get $1 worth of stuff. If you spend that same dollar 10 years from now, you're going to get a quarter of the things that you could have bought. So how likely are you to save? You're not likely to save. You're much more likely to just spend the money today. And then 10 years from now, when you decide that you want to get married, when you decide that you want to buy a house, you don't have savings. So what do? You borrow. You get into debt. So the first and most obvious impact of the fact that money has been made much more inflationary is people lose the ability to save, people lose the ability to provide for their future, and then financially they become much more likely to get into debt rather than to be savers. But then the second order effects of this are far more profound than just an increase in, than just the economic destruction that it causes. Because what we see now happening is that the future itself is more uncertain for you. And so therefore you become a lot more present-oriented rather than future-oriented. And I think this is an enormously important point, which is one of the center points of focus in my work. And it is the concept of time preference. And time preference refers to the degree to which people discount the future compared to the present. So everybody, of course, values the present more than the future. If I told you, would you rather have this say apple or a car or a house or whatever it is, any good, if I told you you can have the same exact good today or 10 years from now, everybody would choose to have it today, right? If I told you you could have a house today or have it in 10 years, you'd prefer to have it today. Everybody prefers the future, the present to the future, obviously, for the simple reason that the present is present, it's here, whereas the future is uncertain. You don't know if you're going to be here in 10 years' time, but also 10 years' time is a significant part of your life. And so you'd rather spend those 10 years with that house or with that car or that Apple or that consumer good rather than not spend it with it. So everybody has a preference for the present, and that's perfectly normal. But what distinguishes us as humans and what has allowed us to build our civilization as human beings over time is our ability to think of the long term and to start reducing our discounting of the future. In other words, lowering our time preference. So yes, we still prefer the present to the future, but as we become more intelligent, as we become more future-oriented, our discounting of the future declines. So we start discounting the future less and less, and we start valuing the present a little bit less compared to the future. We still value the present more than the future, but our degree of discounting of the future declines as we become more and more civilized. And so this creates this situation where human beings begin to think more and more about the future. And I believe an extremely critical part of our ability as human beings to become civilized, to move away from being similar to animals, is our ability to start thinking more about the future. And I think what has reinforced that, a technology that has been absolutely critical for that over time, is money. Because money is the technology that we use to communicate with our future. It's the technology that we use to transfer value from today to the future. And so the better our money is, the more likely we are to successfully transfer value from today to the future. And therefore, the more likely we are to succeed in providing for our future self. And so then, because money makes the future slightly less uncertain, the better the money is, the less uncertain the future, the more we start valuing the future, the more we start behaving in a way that is future-oriented. So you see that as humanity moves toward harder and harder forms of money that store value better and better, what happens is we become more future-oriented. We start building more and more civilization. We start saving more. We start accumulating more capital, and we become more and more successful at providing for our future self, and that's what helps us build modern civilization. This is what civilization rests upon. So now what happens when we reverse that? When we take the money that used to increase at 1.5% and then we make it increase at 15%, we 10x the supply growth of money, we reverse the process of civilization. The entirety of the dynamic that leads to civilization is our ability to sacrifice today for the future. But if the mechanism or the tool or the technology that we use to transfer our sacrifices from today to the future is broken, then our ability to sacrifice today for the future is compromised, and then our incentive to sacrifice today for the future is undermined, and as a result, we become much more present-oriented. And I believe this is a very important point to avoid understanding why the world today is the way it is. In a sense, we see how technology is improving our lives. We see how we're constantly inventing new things, and that's increasing our productivity. You know, we've got cars and airplanes and trains and giant ships and computers. And so technology is increasing our productivity. And yet, in many ways, I think, you know, your grandmother is probably right. Things were kind of better back in her day. She does have a point, you know, even though their TV was black and white, and even though they didn't have Instagram and all of these amazing toys that we have, she kind of does have a point in that in the past, people used to be much more future-oriented because they had a more reliable way of transferring money to the future. And I think you see this reflected in people's, I think you see it reflected in the family, for instance. People were more likely to be serious about their family, to sacrifice for family, to carry out the important and unglamorous things that are necessary for a family to function successfully. And you see it, I believe you see it also in architecture. If you go around anywhere in the world, you look at 19th century architecture, you see it today, it's usually much more beautiful. You walk around Beirut, I think it's a great example. You look at early 20th century architecture, the old houses in downtown, the old houses in Ashrafiyya, they're the nicest houses in the neighborhood. And then you look at the things that were built in the 60s and 70s and 80s when we moved toward high inflationary money, you see that basically the houses are built they last a lot less. They 20, 30, 40 years, the house needs major renovation or needs to be deconstructed. So I think it's something that is a very powerful explanation that we see, that money essentially is like a control knob for our time preference. The harder the money, the lower our time preference, the more future-oriented we are. And then the easier the money, the more inflationary the money, the higher our time preference, the more we discount the future, the more present-oriented we are. And of course, if you really want to see this, it's most obvious when money is being very inflationary. And those of you who are here over the last 5 years will notice this. I think it's very easy to see this. People, when the value of the Lebanese lira was declining very quickly, people weren't really making 10-year plans at that point. Everybody was getting their salary, and their life was all about, how am I going to survive to the end of the month? And so you got your salary, you ran to the supermarket, and you spent your money straight away. You didn't save any of that money. You tried to spend the money as fast as you can, because you knew by the end of the month, the can of tuna was going to be worth a lot more, so you have to buy it at the beginning of the month. So hyperinflation is that phenomena put on turbocharge, basically, where people stop thinking about the long term. They start thinking more and more about the present, and that's all that they think about. And then high inflation is that, but at a little less turbocharged. And then the low inflation situation, which is the regular situation that you see in most of the world, where you have a money supply that's increasing in supply at about 7 or 8% per year. In that situation, it's like a slow boil. People are slowly becoming more and more high time preference, and as a result, they're thinking more and more about the present and discounting the future more and more. So I believe this is an enormously important phenomenon, and I think Bitcoin is massively important as a technology because it reverses this. And I think we already see this among individuals. If you know Bitcoiners, it's almost like a joke among Bitcoiners that as soon as Bitcoiners discover Bitcoin, they stop doing drugs, they stop drinking, they stop doing stupid things, and they start putting all of that money into Bitcoin and start thinking about the long term, because suddenly you've got a way of providing for yourself in 10 years' time. And it's incredible how many people have shared with me this experience, because I talk about it in my book, and in my book I provide the kind of theoretical explanation for it, but it's something that they all feel. In other words, you're the kind of person who's usually spending their money at the beginning of the month. You get your money, you just spend it by the end of the month. You don't save. It doesn't make sense for you to save because there's no easy way for you to save for the future. So you don't think about the future. You don't think about starting a family. You think about just spending your money, partying, drinking, going on vacation, and so on. And then suddenly somebody provides you with this new technology, and now you have an easy way where you can save a little bit, and you can see how in 10 years' time you can have significant savings. And so now you start thinking about, well, what am I going to be doing in 10 years' time? Maybe I should have a family in 10 years' time. Maybe I should start behaving in a way that is conducive to me having a family in 10 years' time. Maybe getting drunk every day isn't the best way to go through life if I care about where I'm going to be in 10 years' time. And so people start caring about their health, they start working out, all of these things, they become a lot more low time preference, they become a lot more future-oriented in the way that they behave. And I don't think it's a coincidence. I think it's going to continue to be the case. Now, maybe 1% of the world, 2% of the world, maybe 3% of the world uses Bitcoin. I think as this becomes more and more popular, we're going to start seeing it reflected in a much more profound way, not just on individuals, but also on society overall. So this is the issue when it comes to the first aspect of it, which is that the Bitcoin network software uses the hardest money ever. And so therefore the impact of that, I believe, is enormous. And well, there's the second point on the impact of this. I said is the first impact is that you as an individual, you're losing the ability to provide for the future from the easy money. But then the flip side of this, the scissor has two blades. On one blade is you're losing your money, but there's another question as well. Who's getting that money? That's a very important question. Who's getting all that energy, all that monetary energy that you could have saved for your future? Now that we have an inflationary money, it's all going to the government and to the people that are connected to the government that are able to increase the money supply and benefit from the increase in the money supply. And so what has that meant? Well, what it's meant is that over the last 100 years, we've had an enormous increase in the power of governments over individuals. I believe this is driven by the fact that governments have a money printer. The ability to have a money printer is massively important. You print money, you can just buy anything. And because of that, governments have become very, very powerful. And governments, it's become normal for people to assume that government should just control everything, government should decree everything, because most people think government just needs to pass a law that we need to do this, and then that thing happens. And in a sense, it's kind of true. As long as the money works, then yeah. I mean, one of my favorite examples is Lebanon has the train authority, still operates today. Why does Lebanon have a train authority when it doesn't even have a train? Because it has a money printer. When you have a money printer, you can do a train authority. You can pay people to work on the train authority without there being a train. You have a money printer. Of course, it works until it doesn't, right? When it doesn't work, then yeah, it causes the destruction of the entirety of society. So it works very well for the people of government, because while it works well for them and for their cronies and for the people they're connected to and for the banks that own the banks, the central bank and so on, and the connected financial institutions. So it works very well for them, but it obviously doesn't work well for the people. And when it blows up, they're not the ones who pay the price. It's people who pay the price, because it's their savings that are being destroyed. It's savings in the bank account that are being destroyed in that situation. And so the implications of this is, the implication of this has been very profound. Government have a lot more power, government are able to spend a lot more. And also, I think a very important point is government are able to fight wars. And the thing is, with governments, the reason I think the world is constantly going from crisis to crisis is because crisis is the best reason, is the best justification for running the money printer. And so governments are very, very fond of crises. When you tell people we have a crisis, people are afraid. And then, please just do anything, just do something, please help us do something. And so what can you do? Run the money printer, always. Whenever there's any problem in life, the answer is printing money. When I used to teach macroeconomics at LAU, I used to tell my students, let me give you the cheat code to this course. Whatever the question is, the whole point of this course is to arrive at the answer that we need to print money. So if you find yourself at the exam, and you don't know what the question is, you don't understand anything, look at whichever one of the multiple choice answers tells you we increase the money supply. That's the one they want you to get. The whole point of the course is this. It's a whole bunch of numbers and equations and stories and elaborate nonsense, but all of it is aimed at one conclusion. Let's print money. That's what all of modern economics is. These people have a money printer and they're very, very keen to use it. And so they're always coming up with reasons for why they use it, and it always works out very well for them when they use it, and it doesn't work out very well for you. But it's okay if it doesn't work out very well for you, because when the problems and when the consequences of the money printer materialize and the problems happen, who are you going to run to? The government. And what are you going to tell them to do? Print more money to fix the problems of money printing. And this is how we have gone in the last century, in the last 60 years, from 1971 until 55 years, we've gone from a world in which an ounce of gold was $35 to a world in which now it is about $3,500. So gold is up 100-fold in terms of the dollar. In other words, the dollar is down 99% compared to gold during this period. Why? Because of the money printer. Because every problem can be fixed by printing money. And so governments are always doing that. And of course, that then creates an enormous constituency of industries and people and parasites that live off the money printer, and then they want to keep coming up with more and more excuses to run the money printer. And a good way of understanding what the US government does around the world is that it's just searching for elaborate excuses to run the money printer. So why do they need to do all of these wars, and why do they need to keep financing all of this insanity around the world? Because it's a good excuse to run the money printer. It's a big part of it. And so all kinds of special interests can continue to get what they want because they can continue to rely on the money printer. And as long as you're able to influence people in the direction of being sympathetic to this, then you can keep running the money printer more and more. And of course, the human cost to this is absolutely devastating. It's no coincidence. The century of central banking, in the last 110 years since we've had central banks running on fiat money, it's no coincidence that this has been the century of total war, We've had more war in this century than any century before. World War I, World War II, and since then we've just had, arguably it's all been World War I. Arguably, in my opinion, World War I started in 1914 and hasn't ended. And we're still, all of the conflicts that you look around in the world today, they are just the continuation of World War I. And the reason World War I never ended is because with World War I, they started running the money printer, and all of these conflicts could continue to be financed from money printing over and over and over again. It was different before that. In the 18th and 19th century, particularly in Europe, European countries had developed essentially the mores of civilized warfare. And a big part of that was because of gold being money. No country in Europe, no king, nobody anywhere on earth can print gold. And so therefore, if you're a king in Europe in 1785 or 1881 or whatever, and you want to fight a war, you looked at your treasury and you knew you had this many kilograms of gold in your treasury. So you knew that fighting a war for a day meant this many kilograms per day, and I have that many kilograms. So I can only fight a war for this long. So then I need to be careful about picking a war. I need to be careful about starting the war, and I need to be careful about how the war goes. And that made wars usually much less bloody, and they continue to become less and less bloody. So you see a trend, 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th century, the number of victims in war continues to decline as a percentage of the population. But then in the 20th century, it shoots up again. It becomes much higher than the previous centuries. And the reason for that, in my opinion, is because of the shift from gold to fiat money. When governments had a fixed sum of gold and they couldn't print more of it, then they could only fight for as long as they had gold in their treasuries. And then if they wanted to get more gold from their people, that was complicated. It was difficult. You had to go to people, knock their door, tell them to give you gold. They'll tell you, sorry, we don't have gold. Then you had to go search the whole house. And people don't like to be searched. They don't like to be robbed. So likely they might shoot at your people. So you need to have an army go door to door in your own country on top of the army that's fighting the foreigners. It's just not very practical. It's better to just be a civilized human being and not fight a lot of wars. And when wars did happen in that regard, governments and kings were fighting wars in battlefields. This was how civilization continued to evolve. That, France and Germany would fight a war, and the war would take place in a battlefield. And in Paris and in Frankfurt and in Munich and in the French cities, life continued as normal. And people in France and Germany would still trade with one another. But the war was being fought here, and then when the war would be settled, then there will be territorial changes. There will be, this part of the country would move from France to Germany because Germany won, but business continued in that country as usual. And then the day it changes, you stop paying tax to the French king, you start paying tax to the German king. And life continued as normal. Because again, governments needed to be careful. Because if you were the kind of king who didn't care, who went around fighting and killing civilians and destroying capital, destroying cities, then that meant a lot of destruction of wealth. That meant you lost your wealth, and that meant that you were going to lose the war to kings that had the responsible foresight to think about preserving capital, preserving human life, in order to maximize the amount of money that they can utilize. So under hard money, we were moving toward a more and more peaceful world, and then fiat money moved us to the world of endless, total war, in which the entire population is considered a combatant. Then cities are legitimate targets, and governments don't care because they run the money printer. So this is, I would say, a brief overview of the of the importance of Bitcoin from the fact that it is hard money. And then the second aspect that I mentioned when I was defining Bitcoin as a network is the fact that it is it's essentially a network with no admins. It doesn't rely on anybody. You don't have to trust anyone to use Bitcoin. You download the software, you read the software yourself, you run it on your computer, and then if you're able to, if you have the private key to send a Bitcoin transaction to anybody, then you're able to send that Bitcoin transaction and nobody can stop you. That's really the value proposition of Bitcoin, which I believe is also enormously significant and important because it represents the first time that we have a working alternative to central banks. And that's really something unique, because before that, If you wanted to move money from Lebanon to the US, from the US to China, from Russia to Brazil, before Bitcoin, every single mechanism and technology that we had for moving money had to go through your central bank. Whether you were going to use a credit card, Western Union, bank transfer, whatever it was through a financial institution that was connected to the central bank, and it went through the central bank, and it went through the US central bank, which controls all of the world's central banks effectively. So we have this one monopoly system on money, and it's really the most evil, perverse monopoly because it is the monopoly that is in everything. And people talk about free markets and the importance of free markets. We can't have a free market if every transaction has money in it, and money itself is not a free market. We have a monopoly in money, and therefore we have a monopoly on everything. The people who control the money control the entire world because every transaction involves money. Every sandwich you buy is one half, the transaction is one half of it is a sandwich and the other half is money. Every industrial equipment that you import from China to here, it's money versus a good. So if all of these transactions go through a monopoly authority, that monopoly authority is effectively enslaving all of humanity. And this is the world in which we live in. And that's what the world, that explains a lot about how the world functions. We all have to use that monopoly until Bitcoin came about. Now, we all have access to a monetary technology that allows us to send and receive money from anywhere in the world without having to go through governments, without having to go through political institutions, without having to go through the central bank, parliament, all of the regulatory agencies. Sending money has just become a technological process. It's just like clicking a button on a machine. It's like turning on your AC. It's a machine. You click the thing works. You don't need permission from anybody. You don't need anything. If you can build an AC in your own room and you can make it work, it's a technology. And so Bitcoin makes money into that, and so it takes it out of the hand of the monopoly. And I believe the implication for that is enormous because it allows us to have an entirely free market monetary system outside of the control of government. And I think the implication will be enormous. It's massively beneficial to humanity that we can finally get rid of that monopoly. So this, in a nutshell, is why I think Bitcoin is very important. And I think it's going to really change the world. However, Bitcoin is still, at this point, it's still about 1% of the world's money. If you want to think about what is money today, the world has something in the range of about $100 trillion in government currencies, which is physical cash plus checking accounts and saving accounts. This is the basic form of money that exists in the world today. There's about $100 trillion of that all over the world. There is about another $120 trillion of government bonds around the world. These are, I think you can count them as money. And if you look at large financial institutions, what they consider as money, where they hold their large cash balances, they hold it in treasuries and they hold it in government bonds because government bonds protect you from, or at least they're supposed to be, that's what the advertisement says. They are the way to protect you from inflation. So your money is losing value, so nobody wants to hold on to large quantities of money. So if you have millions of dollars, you don't want to just put $1 million in a checking account and earn 0.2% interest per year as they devalue 7%. So you put them in government bonds and you earn 2% or 3%, and then they devalue 7%, but at least you think you've won because you made 2-3%. So you can count that as money as well. So we've got about $100 trillion in cash, $100 trillion in government bonds. And then you could also say gold is about another $20 trillion. And you could also say that maybe some of the other financial assets, people are using them as money because they're not, a lot of people buy real estate not because they want to own it, not because they want to use it, because they want to use it as a way to store value. And you could count that as being part of money supply. So overall, you could say that the global money supply is about $200 to $300 trillion. And this sounds very weird for most people because we never think of money as being a market good. But I believe this is a very important mental jump that people need to make. And I think it's kind of it's the thing that distinguishes between mainstream approaches to economics and what is known as the Austrian School of Economics, which I consider myself a part of the Austrian School of Economics. One of their main differences from the mainstream Keynesian economics that we study at university is that the Austrians think of money itself as a market good. Money is a product of the market. Whereas everything else, all of the economics that we teach at university is telling you that money is not something that is from the market. Money is something that the government has to provide, and it is only the government that can provide it. And without the government, we can't have money. And if it wasn't for the benevolence of government, then we wouldn't have a form of money and we wouldn't have a functioning economy. And so that kind of makes you think of money as if it is kind of like just a fixture or an infrastructure, neutral infrastructure to the market. That markets emerge when the government lays out the groundwork and the infrastructure. They put the they make the important thing, which is money, and then that allows us to have markets. But that's just propaganda from people who want to print money. In reality, money itself is a market good. Gold did not become money because governments passed a law that said gold is money. Gold became money before any government existed, and it has survived every government that has ever existed. They all died, and gold remained as money after they died. So governments didn't make gold into money. Governments made their own money out of gold in order for them to be able to have money. If you wanted your government to function, you had to make your coins out of gold. If you made your coins out of something else, then you just didn't have money. So money is not something that is a product of government. Money is a product of the market. And therefore, if you're able to understand that, that will help you understand Bitcoin. And I think this is one of the main reasons most people don't get Bitcoin. And they continue to be stuck at thinking of it, oh, it's just a speculative bubble, oh, it's just a Ponzi scheme, oh, it's just a tulip, oh, it's just all these silly explanations that we've been hearing for 10, 15 years. It's because they can't make the intellectual jump to understand money as a market good, as something that emerges on the market. If you think of it as something that emerges on the market, if you think of it as a market good, then you ask yourself, well, what is it that makes a market good? Money. And the answer is, it works as money if it's good at holding its value, if it can be transferred, if it can be moved around. And then when you start thinking about these properties, just like a market good. So what is it that makes a good jacket? What makes a good jacket is that it keeps you warm, it doesn't get wet, it doesn't ruin when it gets wet, and so on. So once you think about the properties of what makes a good jacket, then you are able to understand what's a good jacket and you can buy a good jacket. But if you think jackets are just something that, government decides what the jacket is, and then you just wear whatever plastic bag they give you, and you think, okay, this is my jacket. And then you wonder why you're always cold. But if you understand that it is a market good, then you can see what is happening with Bitcoin right now as being the process of a market adoption of a new form of money. That's exactly what is happening. Currently, Bitcoin has already gone from zero, when there was no value to Bitcoin, to about $2.5 trillion currently, or about almost $2.4 trillion. So it's still only about 1% of the world's money, but that's still an incredible growth because it's gone from 0 to 2.4. We've never seen anything grow this big, this fast, ever. Nothing has ever, there are only a few things that are as big as Bitcoin left in the world. Gold is one, Apple, Facebook, Google, Nvidia. Yeah, there are maybe 5 companies, and gold are the only assets that are as big as Bitcoin. But they all needed a lot more time to get to that than Bitcoin did. Nothing has ever grown as fast as Bitcoin. And for me, I think this is where you really understand the market opportunity in Bitcoin, is that it's because the total addressable market for Bitcoin is infinitely larger than every other market for anything in the world. So think about, what is the market for electronics? What is the market for computers? What is the market for cell phones, iPhones? 8 billion people in the world. Apple has already sold maybe more than 1 billion iPhones. More than 1 billion people around the world have an iPhone or something like that. I don't know how many, but something in that range. We've got billions of people using iPhones all over the world. It's an enormous market. So how big is Apple? $2 trillion. Well, can Apple grow a lot more? Not really. I mean, maybe they go from 1 billion to 4 billion people. So the market cap for Apple grows another 4x. But with Bitcoin, we're talking about $300 trillion. So, you could say that Apple's roof is about $3 trillion. Well, with Bitcoin, it's about $300 trillion. It's by far bigger than all the market, than any other market in the world. And what we're seeing is that as Bitcoin continues to grow, it's demonstrating product market fit. It's demonstrating that this is actually how this is functioning as money. More and more people use it as money. And as it grows, it becomes better money, because the most important thing about money is its liquidity, is how liquid it is. This is the reason why the Chinese yuan, the Japanese yen, they're some of the world's biggest currencies, but they're basically worthless here. If you have 100 or 1,000 yen bill, it's worth something like, what, $10? If you have it with you here in Lebanon, it's practically worth nothing. You will not find anybody who will take it from you, because it's valuable only in Japan. It's only valuable in certain places that trade a lot with Japan, where you can find that liquidity for it. But Bitcoin is liquid everywhere. It's valid and it's valuable everywhere, and the market continues to grow for it. And yes, it's only 2.5 trillion today, but it has the potential to grow another 100x. So until Bitcoin is the world's only money, until the whole world is running on Bitcoin, then there's basically a growth opportunity in Bitcoin. You can't just think of Bitcoin as being a money. You can think of Bitcoin as being a startup, a fast growth startup disrupting the industry of money. So a good analogy here is to think of it as being like Uber. Remember when Uber came out, what it was saying is that it was going to effectively disrupt the global taxi industry. And so instead of people using regular taxis, people are going to start using Uber. It's more convenient because it's, you can see the guy on the map, and you can see the price. He can get the price, and it's a convenient way for the driver and for the passenger to use this, and it is disrupting that. Bitcoin is in a sense doing something similar, but it's not disrupting something as small as the global taxi industry. It's disrupting the world's biggest market, which is money. And it's also disrupting the world's biggest evil, which is central banks and all of the horrible things that they do. So it's got an enormous potential for growth that I think at this point, as long as Bitcoin is still very small, as long as Bitcoin hasn't reached a market capitalization of, say, $100 trillion, before Bitcoin is worth $5 million in today's terms, it's still think of it as being like an early stage startup. You're buying into Bitcoin now is similar to buying into Uber in 2014 or buying into Amazon in 2000. In 2000, if you bought Amazon as a company was smaller than one branch of Walmart. There was one small branch of Walmart somewhere in Ohio that was selling more things than all of Amazon. And yet, some smart people invested in Amazon knowing that in 10 years' time, all of Amazon is going to be bigger than all of Walmart. In fact, today it's probably bigger than most of the retailers combined. Because you can see that the potential with digital things, there is an enormous potential for growth that is unheard of with analog technologies. It was much harder for Walmart to grow into, say, a $100 billion company than it is for Amazon. Because once Amazon can get its model to scale and work digitally, then it can scale massively and very quickly. And Bitcoin is similar in that regard. So in a sense, at this point, there's the nice theoretical stuff and all of the political stuff that I like to talk about on time preference and savings ratio. But there's also the the financial self-interest. This is a huge investment opportunity, and it's something that is really just once in a lifetime. You could even say once in a species. We're never going to see this opportunity where a form of money emerges that is better than all the other forms of money because it is fixed supply, because we've never invented a fixed supply money before. All of our monies increase in supply, and ideally you want your money not to increase in supply. So we finally found the money that doesn't increase in supply. So it's inevitable that it's going to eat all the other monies, and therefore it is inevitable that it's going to continue to grow. And now it's an enormous opportunity for people to get into it. So now here you can choose. Really, there are really two ways to go about it. There's the, the المثل اللي بيقول بدك عنب ولا تقتل الناطور. There are two ways to go about life here. You can choose to be stupid, and obviously that's your right. And a lot of people, the majority of people, still insist on their right to be stupid about it, where they say no. In university they taught us that money needs to do 1, 2, 3, 4. Bitcoin doesn't do 1, 2, 3, 4. Wah wah wah. Ma bidi. Bitcoin is not money. I don't want to do it. It's broken. It's stupid. Bitcoiners are stupid, and it's going to collapse. This is basically how most people are. But then there is the alternative approach, which is be smart about it. What they taught you at university isn't divine scripture. They taught you at university is central bank propaganda. Think about money as a market good. Understand that this is a tiny little market. Bitcoin currently is a tiny little good, but it is demonstrating a massive product market fit for a much larger market. So you've got an enormous opportunity now to get in at an early stage of this, and you would benefit enormously. And basically everybody who has bought Bitcoin has benefited enormously. Nobody who has bought Bitcoin has lost. Basically, we're very close to the all-time high. So unless you bought last week at 122, then basically everybody is up on Bitcoin. And so, and it's never happened that anybody who's bought Bitcoin and waited for 5 years has down. And most of the time, the vast majority of people are in profit after a year or 2 or 3 or something like that. So it's an enormous opportunity, and it's really very, very lucrative. And it's something that I think is demonstrating this, because if you look over the last 5 years, over the last 10 years, over the last 15 years, Bitcoin has vastly outperformed every other investment opportunity you can think of. There is absolutely nothing that has performed as well as Bitcoin anywhere. So if you compare returns on Bitcoin to returns on S&P 500, NASDAQ, Dow Jones, government bonds, gold, anything, look at all of the world's best hedge funds. Look at all those people who get on CNBC and start shouting angrily about, the Fed should do this and the Fed should do that, and you should buy this and you shouldn't buy that. And all of these people, you look at their portfolio at the end of the year, what do you think they're doing? They're making 8%, 9%, 12%. And if they beat the S&P 500, they celebrate like they're, winning the World Cup. And on the other hand, Bitcoin is, over the last 10 years, Bitcoin has done 80% per year, compound annual growth rate, which is just incredible. So 80% per year increase over the last 10 years, whereas all these other assets are, somewhere between -10 and +15, basically, per year. So people who are investing in everything else at this point are massively missing out on life-changing money. And I know it makes me sound like I'm here to sell you a Ponzi scheme, but I don't particularly care because I'm not here to sell you anything. Bitcoin is not mine. I'm not selling Bitcoin, and it's not something that I made. And this is where the difference is between Bitcoin and all the other digital currencies. And that all the other ones are essentially proprietary. There's a guy who controls them. There's a guy who runs them, and that's why they're out there promoting them. Nobody's out there really promoting Bitcoin because there's no marketing budget for Bitcoin. All the other currencies, they have somebody promoting them. So sometimes I don't care, particularly when I'm talking to people in places that I like Lebanon. I'm willing to have a few people call me a con artist if it helps a few other people change their life. So I don't care. I think it's an enormous opportunity, and I've been saying this for many, many years to a lot of people, and the people who have listened have benefited enormously. And I think the key thing to understand is what I did in my book is it's not just a theoretical book, because I didn't just say, well, here's what I think. I made very testable predictions, and I put up an explanation for why Bitcoin has gone up. My book was published 8 years ago, so half of Bitcoin's life was before my book was published, and the other half was after the book was published. And so in the first 8 years, when I wrote the book, Bitcoin went from $0 to $7,000. 7,888 exactly. That was the price mentioned in my book. And since then, it's now up to 120. So it's up about 15x, 15-fold. So what I said is, okay, it's gone up enormously over the last 8 years. Well, why? So I put up an explanation for why. It's because the supply cannot be increased. So when demand goes up, The only way to meet the extra demand is that the price rises. And then I explained why the supply won't be increased, and there's no way for anybody to increase the supply. And so therefore, if the supply can continue to be increased, then more and more people are just going to find out about it, and the demand's going to go up, and the price is going to continue to go up. And indeed, it is what has happened. So this is unique in that it is an academic opportunity, but also that has a very clear real-world implication. A lot of people are out there writing all kinds of books about economics. They have all kinds of very righteous opinions, and they shake their fists and they tell you we should do this, and Riyad Salami should do that, and the Federal Reserve should do this, and they should do that, and you should do this, and you should do that. But ultimately, no matter how angry they get and how hard they try and sell their book and how hard they try and convince you to buy whatever it is that they're selling, none of these people can offer you a really a scientifically inspired, clear plan of action that has stood the test of time. Okay, people will tell you, yeah, you should invest and you should do this and you should do that. Okay, well, if you follow this book, it may work, it may not work. If it works, maybe you make 10%, maybe you make 15%, maybe you do this. But really, with Bitcoin, it's a very different thing. It's a very, very, very big and very lucrative opportunity. And I've explained why that is the opportunity, and I think it's going to continue to be the case. So I think, essentially, if we're headed toward, if nobody finds a way to break Bitcoin, which I think, as computer scientists, I know some of you have technical competence, so I urge you, as your homework, to go back home and try and break Bitcoin. Try and make more than 21 million Bitcoins and see how that works out for you. And if nobody finds a way to make more than 21 million Bitcoin, which I don't think they will, and you can read my book for an explanation of why I don't think that is the case, then there's no escaping it. There's only going to be 21 million Bitcoin. Demand for Bitcoin is going to continue to go up. Then the price of Bitcoin is going to continue to go up. So that's an enormous and highly lucrative opportunity. And it's something that happens really, as I said, once in a species. We finally found the perfect money, and now the whole world is going to get on this perfect money. And they can scream, they can shout, they can come up with all of their explanations about why they don't like it and why they could have done a better job making a better money, and how Satoshi is actually an idiot because he didn't do it like I would have done it. And none of that matters. Ultimately, this is just going to continue to go up. And where we're going is, 10 years ago, people laughed at the idea that Bitcoin was going to make it to $10,000. Then they laughed at $100,000. And now they laugh at $1 million. But I believe it's inevitable. It's going to continue to rise. And I think this is, the way to think of it is, your children one day will work. Likely they will work for Bitcoin. And your son's salary for a whole year, when he's 30 years old, maybe let's say he's a successful engineer, he will work for a whole year to earn the same number of Bitcoin that today you might be able to buy for the price of a dinner. And this is, I think, the really asymmetric opportunity where it is just, this is why I'm willing to look a little ridiculous when I'm being a little bit pushy about it, because honestly, I would love nothing more than if people in places I love, like Lebanon, were doing this. And a lot of people laughed at me when I was saying this stuff in 2015 and 16 and 17 and 18 and 19, and they told me, no, Bitcoin is going to get hacked, and they're going to ban it, and the quantum computer is going to come and it's going to destroy it. And guess what happened? Bitcoin is up 100-fold since then. And guess what got hacked? Your central bank is what got hacked. And that's the real issue here, that, in people's mind, a lot of people think about, well, Bitcoin, it has to beat this kind of idealized form of money that I have in my mind. Okay, it appreciates a lot, but it's a little volatile. I don't like volatility. I'd like it to appreciate more, but without the volatility. Well, find a Bitcoin that appreciates as much as Bitcoin without the volatility, and I would be the first to join. But do you have that? No, you don't. What are your alternatives? Your alternative is Riyad Salami and Jerome Powell and their stupid Ponzi schemes. And that's the reality. So 100 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, I think the same dynamic is going to be playing out. And I think it's a massive, massive opportunity. And so because of this asymmetric bet, because of the asymmetric nature of it, where you sacrifice dinner for one night. You don't go out with your friends and go and party with your friends for 1 week, one night a week, and you put that money in Bitcoin, and then 20 years later, you have a year's income effectively. It sounds ridiculous, but that's exactly what happened. 10 years ago, what was the price of Bitcoin around 10 years ago? In 2015, it was maybe $200 at this point, $300. So imagine, $300, people in Lebanon spend that in a night out. And 10 years ago, you could have bought one Bitcoin with that. It would be worth $120,000, which is a salary for, more than it's a very good salary for 1 year. For most people, it's the salary of several years. And you could have had that, and a lot of us know people who were spending $200, $300 10 years ago on all kinds of silly things. They could have bought $120,000 today with those $200, and I think that dynamic will continue unless you can find a way of making more than 21 million Bitcoin, and that's what I urge you to try and do today. So that is it for me. Thank you very much. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Hello, thank you for your awesome presentation. I agree with everything you said. Actually, Corinne, I remember spent hours talking about different things. However, I have one question. With the rise of drones, let's say making war cheap again, $4,000 Mavic can destroy a $4.5 million Abrams M1A2 with structures such as no-fault divorce. Do you think that the world as it is currently is in a, let's say, structurally, it's in a place where your optimistic prediction, not of the value of Bitcoin, that I totally agree with, but the saving potential of Bitcoin, it might be a bit too late, like war is becoming cheaper, people are not marrying in the West, even in the East, China is having a birth demographics crisis. Don't you think that though it has amazing potential, a war might happen faster than Bitcoin saving humanity, thus putting the whole world to continue the World War I fiasco basically?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, it's basically a race against time. Can we pump Bitcoin fast enough to bankrupt them before they destroy humanity or not? I mean, if I wasn't optimistic about it, I would have killed myself. So you have to be optimistic that it will happen. I think ultimately, I think there is. People have said this for a very long time. They've always been saying, the dollar's going to collapse. All of these governments are going to collapse, and they've been going on for a very long time. But again, you look at the numbers, and it's just it doesn't look like it's very sustainable. And in fact, when you say that war is cheap, it really just means that war is very expensive. So if the $4,000 drone can destroy a $5 million piece of equipment, that means that a lot of war effort is going to be destroyed for very cheap, which is kind of bankrupting these governments faster and faster. But look at the world. You see conflicts everywhere. You look at what the U.S. is doing. It seems pretty clear all of this stuff about Trump ending the wars is just complete nonsense. He's just another stupid actor, like all the rest of them. And they are aggressively fighting Russia in the Ukraine. They are aggressively fighting Iran, and they are seemingly very aggressive about targeting China, which is not going to be a joke, because China is the world's industrial superpower today, and China has an enormous amount of military equipment, and China is not a stupid country. I think if you look at the last 40 years, they have not been doing the stupid things that the U.S. is doing. They went from being one of the poorest countries in the world to one of the richest, and to the world's superpower in industry, all without trying to teach democracy to anybody, all without trying to invade anybody. They're not trying to bring human rights to Congo or Afghanistan. And they just trade with the rest of the world, and it's worked out very well for them. They've been very peaceful. They're not interventionists. They are not intervening in any conflict anywhere. And yet the Americans won't leave them alone. They want to. They're making all this bullshit about there's a genocide in China, in Xinjiang, when it's a peaceful, happy place. Whereas, of course, you look at what they're doing in Gaza. That's just that's not an issue. So it is quite worrying, and I think the powers, the people that control the U.S., effectively Israel, they seem to want to take out China because I don't think they're happy about China. So it is concerning, and our hope is that Bitcoin bankrupts these people, and inshallah, but as bad as it gets, and there can be very bad conflicts, there can be a lot of wars, there can be a lot of horrible things happening, but ultimately, the one thing that will survive the most is likely Bitcoin. I think even if all of humanity dies, Bitcoin will continue to operate for a few more blocks after we all die. There will still be a bunch of transactions in the mempool, and then the miners will clear, and so it'll survive even if we all die. And then if we don't all die, then we'll rebuild civilization from scratch on Bitcoin, or whatever remains of it. Let's secure some margin for us to go back to 19th century, where we had the gold standard, and that way we could stop Bitcoin. But still, I don't think it can stop Bitcoin, because even if they go on a gold standard, Bitcoin is still better than gold because it grows at a lower supply growth rate than gold. So gold is going to continue to grow at around 1.5% to 2% per year in supply. Bitcoin now is at 0.8, and in 3 years it's going to be 0.4, and then after 4 years it's going to be 0.2, and then 0.1. So effectively, the supply of Bitcoin is going to grow a lot less than the supply of gold. So that means Bitcoin is going to appreciate compared to gold, and that means that over time I think it will still win out. But also, I think it's extremely difficult to imagine governments basically repenting from their horrible these institutions only exist from the mentality of we have a money printer and let's have fun with it. So trying to explain to them the idea that the money printer is the problem makes them laugh at you. Like, they've been laughing at me for a very long time, and they're going to continue to laugh at it. I don't think they can quite get it, and I doubt that they will change track. And I think it's just, even if people within governments get it, if you get it, then you have no room in government. You won't win an election. You won't, you can't win an election when you're running on a platform of I'm going to shut down the money printer, because your opponent is going to run on a platform of I'm going to run the money printer and I'm going to give everybody free candy. And so people are going to vote for the free candy, always. Yeah, no problem.
First of all, good afternoon. It was a very insightful talk.
Thank you.
So my question is, what guarantees long-term Bitcoin investors that the Bitcoin network will still be maintained by the miners after all the supply of Bitcoin gets mined? Will the miners get enough rewards or fees to keep on maintaining the network?
Yeah, I think this is a very common question that people have. I think the simple answer as an economist is that if people want the Bitcoin transactions, they will pay for them. So if people want to move money around, then they will pay the miners enough to mine it. And what matters with Bitcoin is that it provides the users an ability to conduct these transactions. And therefore, if somebody wants to attack the network resists the attack by making it lucrative for anybody to mine the transaction. So ultimately what matters is that mining is open to anyone. This is really what keeps Bitcoin functioning, is that you can say, if you control the majority of the mining today, that doesn't mean you control the majority of the mining tomorrow. If you control the majority of the mining and then you start using it to destroy Bitcoin, well, nothing stops me from building more miners and competing against you. On the contrary, when you're doing that, then all of the people who want to use the network, they want to pay the transaction fees. And you're not taking their transaction fees because you don't want to use the network. So you're just making it more lucrative for me to enter. And so ultimately, it's because it's, as I was saying, it has no admin, it has no central authorities that is in charge. That means that the market is always going to be there. And so the customers can always pay the transaction fees for the miners to pay it. But even, you know, I recently I've begun to even change my mind on this, and I think I would go a step a little bit further and say that, yeah, I mean, ultimately, ultimately miners are not what is securing the network. Miners are just currently they get paid a lot of money because they are because we have inflation in Bitcoin. We still have inflation. We still have a large amount of Bitcoin being produced, and so mining is primarily, the reason we have this much mining equipment, I think, is not because it's necessary to secure the network. What secures the network are the nodes that run the operation. Mining currently is very lucrative, and it's a very big industry because it is securing the distribution of the coins. All these new coins, how are you going to distribute them? Who's going to get the coins? You can think of the mining industry as being a malinvestment, in a sense that it's just, it's the people that are benefiting from the inflation. And the difference between Bitcoin and other forms of money is that in fiat, how do you benefit from the inflation? You become president and you put your cousin in charge of the central bank and you do the fun democracy games. But with Bitcoin, we take all of that and we, you know, buy machines and connect them to electricity and have fun. And that way we ensure that the inflation is distributed toward people who have spent roughly the same amount that they earn. But generally, I think one of the biggest misconceptions about Bitcoin mining is the idea that it's a smart thing to do. I think history has shown Bitcoin mining is a terrible, terrible, terrible thing. I very, very strongly recommend anybody. I would strongly recommend that everybody not mine Bitcoin. And I don't think there's the very, very few people will have outperformed just buying Bitcoin. And for instance, if you have $1 million today, and you have two choices. Let's say you knew nothing about Bitcoin today. I convinced you of Bitcoin. You have $1 million. You want to invest them in Bitcoin. You could just go and buy Bitcoin right now, or you could go and set up a Bitcoin mining operation with $1 million. If you just buy the Bitcoin today, right now you're going to get about 8 Bitcoin for the $1 million. So with 8 Bitcoin, you're for the $1 million. If you go and you set up a Bitcoin mining operation, by the time you get the miners shipped and by the time you install them and you build the facility and you get it running and then you operate it for a few years and then you have to deal with the electricity company raising the rates and all of that stuff, you can operate them for 6 years of full-time job and you will never make the 8 Bitcoins. I think this is pretty much the case. I recently, on my Twitter, and I've got, pretty significant number of Bitcoiners following me on my Twitter. So I ran a poll. I asked people, if you've been mining for more than 5 years, and if you've run the numbers on this, would you have been better off if you just bought Bitcoin on day one with all of the money? 78% answered yes, that they would have been better off just buying. 22% said they were better off mining. And my honest opinion is that most of those 22% probably just don't know how to do math, and they're trying to convince themselves that they're better off. Because if you really think of it, and if for me, and I've worked with some people who are working in mining, I've tried to advise them. In most cases, by the time you place the order until the miners arrive, that's it. It's gone. By the time, if you place the order for the miners now, and by the time you plug them in, it's going to be 6 months, 9 months, maybe 12 months until you plug them in. During those 12 months, your $1 million are now worth 4 Bitcoins. And you're never going to make the 4 Bitcoin that you could have made from the 8. So I think people give mining a little bit too much importance, that they think it's too much of a threat, and they think that miners are powerful. Miners are just people that have scammed themselves into paying a premium for their Bitcoins, basically.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hello.
Firstly, thank you very much for the presentation.
My pleasure.
Now, I hope I'm not going to take too much time off of people, but I've written down a list of questions.
Shoot, let's
that
go.
I hope to see answered. Firstly, starting off backwards with the question that the person behind me asked. What's the difference between mining and processing transactions? Are they somewhat related? And who would mine if it's not so lucrative?
So there are two aspects of mining. When you process the transaction, every 10 minutes there's a new block of Bitcoin transactions, somewhere in the range of 2,000 to 3,000 transactions every 10 minutes, I think. And what happens is, okay, you add those transactions to the list of to the record, and you have all of these balances. Basically, what Bitcoin is just a balance sheet. There's all these addresses, and each address has a certain balance. And then every 10 minutes, we update it. This address sent 3 Bitcoin to that address, so we take out 3 from you, and we add 3 to you. So every 10 minutes, we do these updates, but also every 10 minutes, you get rewarded with the new coins. So currently, the block reward is 3.125 coins every 10 minutes. So that adds up to about 450 coins per day. So essentially, you're mining the new Bitcoins and you're processing the transactions. But the new mining of the new Bitcoin is only going to continue for the next 100 years. بعدين خلاص. And هلا حاليا it's 3.125, and then it's going to drop by half every 4 years. By 100 years from now, it's going to, and all of the digits, it's 3.125, and Bitcoin has 8 decimals places after the decimal point. So حاليا it's 3.125. You keep dropping it by half. Eventually, it goes to 0 after about 100 years. At that point, it's just going to be, there's not going to be new coins rewarded.
So it's minor fees.
Yeah, the transaction fees.
Sorry,
Transaction fees. Exactly.
Following up on that, you say that there's a limit to the amount of Bitcoins that can be produced. Now, and please don't take this with a negative connotation, it's truly out of curiosity. What about all the altcoins that use a similar kind of structure to say, hey, we also have another limit of, I don't know, X coins. We are also a currency as hard as the Bitcoin. So
yeah. Well, I think the important thing here is if you look at the history of Bitcoin and the history of all the other digital currencies, and you see why. And this is an extraordinary claim for me to stand here and tell you there's only ever going to be 21 million Bitcoin and nothing is ever going to change that. And it's almost reckless for me as a professional economist and as a university professor to stand up and make something like this and tell people there's only going to be this because, I'm putting my neck on the line. I'm not just going out there and saying, oh, maybe it'll go up, maybe it'll go down. And if it goes up, it'll go up more. If it goes down, it'll go down more. I'm not being very subtle, and I'm not trying to protect myself from this. I'm putting my neck out on the chopping block and saying never more than 21 million.
Oh yeah, I mean the altcoins.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that it's an extraordinary claim, but I can make it in the case of Bitcoin, and I can justify it because we've had it for 16 years. We've had people try and change smaller details about Bitcoin, and they failed. And so I have a very, very, very high degree of confidence that nobody's ever going to change it. Now, the onus of proof is on these other shitcoins, as we like to call them, as a technical term, to try and illustrate why they can't do that. And quite simply, they cannot, because the biggest of them, the biggest, the most decentralized, it changes its supply every couple of years. Nobody even knows at this point what the supply is supposed to be. So Ethereum started off with a schedule where they were going to be increasing it forever, and then they decided, no, we're gonna make it like Bitcoin, and then they decided, no, we're gonna make it decline, and then they decided, no, it's not working with decline, we're gonna make it go back up, and I've lost track of what they're doing. But basically, it's like a startup where a bunch of nerds get together and they decide to change the product, and so they can change it with all of these coins. If they can do it with the biggest one, they can do it with all the rest of them. And this is the kind of big picture answer to the question. But the specific answer here is that ultimately, once Bitcoin was built in a way, I call it, this is a term that I invented that became very popular, and it's a little sacrilegious. I hope anybody doesn't get offended. Yeah, I call it the immaculate conception of Bitcoin, in that the guy who invented it, he was anonymous, and he just introduced the software, and he didn't have a pre-mine. He didn't say, okay, I have 1 million coins for me, and now yallah, all the rest of you play along and have the 20 million coins and make me rich. From day one, he introduced it, he sent it to people, he sent it to cryptography mailing lists, and he gave people the software to run it. And from day one, every single human being that has ever used Bitcoin and not used Bitcoin has had the same exact opportunity to buy or mine Bitcoin at the same exact price or difficulty. So nobody has ever had a Bitcoin, an advantage. Nobody ever got discounted Bitcoin. Nobody ever has a wasta in Bitcoin, you know? Whereas with all of the other ones, and so first of all, you have that, no pre-mine, and you have no central authority. You have the guy who started it, he's anonymous, and then he disappeared. This was really the most important thing. He disappeared, and the thing continued to operate even without him, which was really, really very, very important. Yani, he was in charge for the first year or two. Nobody knew who he was, and then he disappeared, and it continued to work. So since he's disappeared, nobody can claim to control Bitcoin. There's no Bitcoin CEO. There's no Bitcoin president. There's no person you can call if you lose your coins who can fix it for you. But what this created is that everybody who was interested in a neutral protocol, well, now Bitcoin exists. So if you're interested in a form of money that's honest, that's neutral, that nobody controls, that can scale to have the whole world use it, what are you going to do? You're going to use Bitcoin. On the other hand, if you're interested in making your own money so that you can get rich, so that you can scam people, so that you can be the rich person, so that this network is yours, then you're going to start your own coin. And so every single coin that came after Bitcoin, if you've heard about it, there are about 40 million coins right now, 40 million shitcoins, 40 million different digital currencies, and meme coins and all of that stuff. If you've heard about any of them, you've not heard about less, maybe you've heard about 100. Yeah. Well, if you've heard about any of these coins, the only reason you heard about it is because somebody was in charge of it, and that somebody was running it, and they had a vested interest in operating it. So it was operated like a startup, where there is a group of people who are behind it, and they fund themselves from the pre-mine. They always mine an initial quantity of the coin, they keep it for themselves, and then they run the code, they do the advertisement, they buy the press releases.
And they hope that other people would adopt it to make them rich.
Exactly, and people buy it, and then they sell their coins. So with all of these other coins, the dynamic is very different. The people that are in charge, they are only selling the coin, Whereas with Bitcoin, everybody who's used Bitcoin has had to buy in. Whereas with all these other coins, all of these people are selling. So Ripple, Ethereum, BitConnect, all of these, they're just scams. They're very transparent scams because there's a person in charge, and he's just been selling, and he's been getting rich from selling. And he is in charge. We know that the people behind Ripple, behind Ethereum, they could change anything in a day. And so they'll never be able to credibly say there is only ever going to be 100 million Ripples or 100 million Ethereum or X million whatever from the coin. Because if push comes to shove, if this starts to grow, it's not difficult to change it. It would be trivial for the government to get 10 people behind Ethereum, put them in a room, put a gun to their head, and tell them you're not leaving until you change the supply.
That's why the guy disappeared.
Exactly. And that's why all of the other coins after that had no hope of replicating the Bitcoin experience. Because if you did what Satoshi did, when Bitcoin exists, then your coin is just now number 28 million out of the 40 million. It's just completely unheard of. Nobody has ever heard of it. Nobody cares about it. Nobody's going to invest in it. It had to be done in that immaculate way, where the guy who invented it did it in the cleanest way and then disappeared. That was our only shot at exiting, at having exit speed from the fiat orbit. We had to get it right the first time with this coin. And then since then, and then after that, khalas, there is no second best. There is no chance at having another run at this, basically.
If I'm boring you guys, please let me know and I stop. So what about the trading platforms? Aren't they still middlemen abiding by in the BTC system, abiding by governance and things like so? In order to get into, I don't know, what's it called, the GDAX, was it, right? You still needed to provide a form of ID in order to transfer fiat currency.
Yeah, but that's this is fiat problems. But once you have your own Bitcoins, then you can just operate with your Bitcoins, and nobody can stop you.
Assuming I have Bitcoin now, how can I do to buy groceries in the supermarket? a real use case in Lebanon for me right now?
Sell it and buy liras and dollars with it to people that are buying it. But there's an enormous liquid market in Bitcoin everywhere. Yani, this is the thing, here in Lebanon, there are dozens of people that buy and sell. In Hamra, there are a couple of shops. You just go and you give them Bitcoin and they give you cash. And again, this is one of those examples of people that want to be, yani, do you want to win or do you want to, No, but what I'm saying is, do you want it to fit the definition of money wherein I need to go to Spinneys and be able to pay with my Bitcoins? And because Spinneys doesn't take it, so therefore I'm just going to wait and I'm not going to buy it when it's at $500. I'm going to wait until it's $5 million. And then, then it will fit my definition. But yeah, when it fits the definition, you buy it at 5 million, and then you work a whole year to buy, to get a tiny fraction of a Bitcoin. But now you have the opportunity of buying it early, and then you convert it into whatever currency, and then you can buy it with Spinny.
Right. Two more questions. And this is, I guess, a little. Okay, one more question.
Okay.
And this is more applicable to computer science. Distributed algorithms. This is a distributed algorithm that is being run off of several nodes. There is such a thing called the Byzantine fault, which says that whenever 1/3 of the nodes in the distributed system fail, then you can no longer get an accurate representation of that system. So what if, for example, a sort of government would be able, and I'm thinking that it could be either US or China, not one of us, right? Would be able to control 1/3 of the nodes of the system. What can happen to that system? And that would be that.
Basically nothing. You take out 1/3 of the nodes, they leave the network continues with the 2/3.
I'm not saying that they leave the network in as much as, for example, they change the ledger in coordination, thus rendering 1/3 of the nodes to be lying.
Well, I'm not. The technical breakthrough for what Bitcoin was is that it was a solution to the Byzantine generals problem. That's what Bitcoin is. The technical aspect of it is we've solved the Byzantine generals problem by introducing proof of work. So it's not a democracy where you can Sybil attack the network by saying you can spin up, go on AWS, spin up 10,000 nodes, spin up 100,000 nodes, and then go in and say, okay, we are a majority and we want to change things. Doesn't matter. You have to do it with the proof of work. And so that's really expensive. This is why. And it's not democracy. And so you can't spoof it and you can't DDoS it. There's no DDoS attack, Sybil attack, all of these things. They don't work.
Thank you so much.
No problem. My pleasure.
Thank you for this everything.
My pleasure.
Just a quick question. If I'm thinking like a 007 villain, the next movie, if I, let's say, kidnapped the guy and made him change his program, could that work?
لا لأنه هلا خلص
He can't change it.
he can't change it. It's he has no particular authority. So he's disappeared.
He can't change it.
Basically, he can't force me to change what's on my computer. And so if he comes along and he says, all right, guys, I figured it out. 21 million was the wrong thing. We need to make it so that Bitcoin goes up in supply by 10% every year. I have no reason to listen to him. And so ultimately, it's you run your own software. So Bitcoin is a consensus system where you're free to run whatever software you want, but you have to be in consensus with the network around the broad consensus parameters in order for the network to continue to operate. So he can't force anybody to change. And it's actually, the more you think about it philosophically, the more mind-blowing it is. Bitcoin really is something unique. It's almost like a force of nature at this point. خلاص إنه الشمس حتطلع كل يوم, and you can't do anything about it. And we can't vote to decide إنه ما بدنا الشمس. We can't vote to say we don't want sunshine today. We can't vote to cancel the wind. We can't vote to cancel the moon. And that's it. Bitcoin is just going to operate. It's going to run a block every 10 minutes. And it's mind-blowing, for the first few years when I was into Bitcoin. I mean, it's staggering to think of it. There's just so much drama happening outside of Bitcoin, and Bitcoin just doesn't care. Every 10 minutes, there's a new block. And you get on TV, there's Nouriel Roubini, he's shouting about it. The BIS guy, the big Bond villain, fat ass, the guy who runs the BIS, the Mexican guy, Augustin Cartes. He's talking about how Bitcoin is bad and Bitcoin's evil and we're going to shut it down. And central bankers and governments and intellectuals and academics and economists and JP Morgan's CEO and all of those people going crazy and shaking their fists at them. Bitcoin doesn't care. Every 10 minutes, there's a new block. They can get as angry as they want, and the price can go up and the price can go down, and Bitcoin doesn't know, doesn't care, and just continues to operate.
That's why we say TikTok next block.
Exactly, TikTok next block. That's it. And it's so humbling because, you know, you can have all of these intellectual objections. We've had so many people write so many reasons about why Bitcoin can't work and it won't work, and all of these people, if they had spent that time driving an Uber and putting their money in Bitcoin, they would have been a lot better off than doing all of the stupid things that they were doing. And Nouriel Roubini, as an example, he first made fun out of Bitcoin on his Twitter account when Bitcoin was at $58. And last week, Bitcoin hit $116,000. So now it's up 2,000-fold, 2,000x. Yani if on that day, instead of making that stupid tweet, he went and he bought $1,000 worth of Bitcoin on that day, or just never spoke about Bitcoin for the rest of all of the last 12 years in which he's been getting hernias every time somebody mentions Bitcoins to him, he would have turned those $1,000 into $2 million. And Bitcoin مشي فيه ولا بلاي. All of his noise is completely irrelevant. All of his stupid ideas are completely irrelevant. It's completely immaterial. Bitcoin doesn't understand what he's saying. Bitcoin can't be affected by it. And it just continues to operate. And whether it's him or the central bankers or the governments or the presidents or all of those people, it doesn't matter. You know, Trump, in his first term, he said Bitcoin is bad and I don't like Bitcoin and we're going to have to blah, 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 blah. And now he's changed around and Bitcoin doesn't know, doesn't care. All that happens is the next block comes along, and if you don't have Satoshis on the next block, you're just getting poorer. That's it. That's all that you're doing. That's why, I guess a good note on which to end, Bitcoiners are, you know, on Twitter, Bitcoiners are always telling all the skeptics, all the enemies of Bitcoin, have fun staying poor. Because if you don't have Satoshis on the next block, all of your noises don't matter. They're not going to feed you anything. You're just getting poorer.
I'm going to shift a little bit on the question types. I'm going to ask you, where does ETFs and Bitcoin treasury companies fit in the global adoption of Bitcoin?
Yeah, I think it's inevitable that you know, Bitcoin can only handle something like 500,000, maybe 1 million transactions a day. So the idea that the whole world is going to be transacting on-chain has always been a non-starter. And that was one of the main ideas that I discuss in my book, that this notion that everybody's going to be using Bitcoin on-chain is just not going to happen. People are going to be using Bitcoin through intermediaries. Now, of course, that raises the question of, is this going to be a security threat for Bitcoin? The intermediary is going to compromise it? And I think no, because we don't need, you know, in order to maintain the 21 million Bitcoin, we don't need everybody to buy all of their groceries and all of their coffees and all their lunch on the chain with Bitcoin. We just need the network to continue to operate at 21 million. And yes, maybe it's going to be, there will be many cases of some of these intermediaries will not be trustworthy and they will create problems and people will lose their Bitcoins and people will, you know, put their Bitcoins in a bank and then the bank will run away with the Bitcoin. These things will happen. And, you know, if you want to protect against them, use your own Bitcoin. But it's not going to be a threat to the network itself. It's going to be a threat to the people who use those services.
To add on it, do you think we'll end up in a scenario where we have on paper 22 million Bitcoin owned?
No, I don't. There's never going to. People like to bring up this term. There's paper Bitcoin, that people are selling fake Bitcoin. And I just don't believe that that is even remotely possible. There's only the 21 million Bitcoin as understood by the nodes. Now, if I have one of those Bitcoins and then I sell that Bitcoin to two different people, I haven't created paper Bitcoin. I've just scammed two people into sharing that one Bitcoin. There's still only one Bitcoin there. So I haven't made more Bitcoin. And I haven't affected people who are using the network. I've affected the two people who bought it. And now they have to figure out how they're going to sort it out. But, you know, that's not really compromising the network. The network's still 21 million.
Okay, I just have a simple question related to the compliance department within the banking sector. كيف نحن فينا نضمن انه البيتكوين ما حيتم استخدامه بتضييع الاموال وتمويل المنظمات الارهابيه؟
كيف حتضمن انه السكينة ما حتستخدم بجرائم؟ انه عندك سكينة ببيتك بس what if somebody else is going to be using a knife to kill somebody? Maybe you should get rid of all your knives. I think ultimately it's just a technology. People are going to use cars and knives, and some people use cars for bank robberies, for terrorist attacks. Does that mean we need to ban cars everywhere and stop everybody from using cars?
Especially انه مثلا fiat money they pass through the central bank, which makes sure انه المصاري ما حيتم استخدامها بهذا المنحى او at least limit هذا الشيء.
Yeah, obviously that's not working. Most of the world's crime is happening in fiat money, and particularly, the big scale crime. So, okay, maybe some small time criminals are using Bitcoin, but the pros, the major leagues of crime, HSBC and JP Morgan, that's where you do the Bitcoin. That's where, the Mexican cartels, Jeffrey Epstein, these people aren't using Bitcoin. Bitcoin doesn't work for that. The real crime, you have to go to the US dollar. That's the real criminal's choice money, diamond, the US dollar. But ultimately, I think Bitcoin, you're running a ledger that is leaving a trace of every transaction, leaving a record of every transaction on tens of thousands of computers all over the world. That's a terrible place to start if you want to run a crime. So if anybody here is interested in doing crime, my advice is stick to the US dollar, the tried and tested choice of criminals worldwide, because it's a lot less risky than Bitcoin. And I think, a lot of people are in jail today because they used Bitcoin for crime, thinking that it was not trackable. But Bitcoin is very trackable. And in fact, this is one of the unpopular opinions I have among Bitcoiners. One of the things that Bitcoiners don't like me saying is that I think the guy who invented Bitcoin and the original vision they had for it was that it's going to grow online as a kind of black market money, gray market money. And then we're going to end up with this world in which we have millions of people around the world using Bitcoin, but their identities aren't known and they're using all these addresses to transact with one another. And we are just looking at all these addresses and we have no idea who they are. But the way that it has played out is that actually at this point, there are companies and law enforcement are able to practically identify the ownership of something like 90% of the existing Bitcoins. And the reason for that is that not everybody, but the vast majority of people have bought in their Bitcoin through KYC channels. So you go to an exchange like Coinbase or Bitfinex, you give them your passport, you give them your information, and then you buy Bitcoin, and then you withdraw it from them to your wallet. So now, they're not tracking you, they're not going around following every single person to see who has how much. But in case one day that coin that you sent was used in a criminal activity, or let's say it was busted and they saw that it was involved in crime, in that case, what they're going to be doing is they are going to find that address and they're going to track it. And then they're going to see, and they're going to go to Coinbase or Bitfinex and say, hey, this address got their money from you. So who is this? And then they're going to be able to find you. So at this point, I think the vast majority of coins are already identified, and it's very, very difficult to get away with it. And personally, for instance, if you came to me and you told me, I have $1 million that I stole from somebody, I have 10 Bitcoins that I stole from somebody, and I want you to help me hide them so that the government doesn't know that they're mine, my honest advice for you is I can't help you. I wouldn't want to be involved in something like this, and I would tell you you should have stolen them in dollars. It would have been a lot easier if you just had dollars. So I wouldn't recommend anybody do anything illegal with Bitcoin. It's very trackable.
So thank you.
Thank you.
I really admire your energy. First of all, Amjad non-stop. Hope it was convincing. Me, myself, I'm part of convinced now. I was asking Gordon, how should I buy? And it's as an appreciation token, Dr. Saifedean. I want, as representing Haigazian and Computer Science Department, my colleagues, in appreciation of your lecture, Bitcoin, the technological solution for money and politics at Haigazian. This is a bit gift, and there is 70th logo of us. This is, I think, one of the best lectures that we did during the year. And I will give the creator of this event, Goran, to handle this appreciation. Thank you, Goran.
Thank you. Thanks.
And also I need to invite my colleagues and Computer Science Student Department, please join us to have a group picture, if you may.
Yes. Thank you.